Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy, actually the first episode of 2024. So welcome to season 4, if I remember correctly, or maybe I'm a bit wrong. But we've been doing this podcast for a number of years now. And if you've been tuning in year after year, first of all, thanks for doing that. Second of all, you're familiar that the first episode of the year typically is me having a guest to talk about what the outlook for the year is. And this year, as if you're following Pakistan, you kind of know the big event is the election that is coming up, or some say the selection. We'll talk to my guest about that. And IMF comes right after that. So it's going to be a very busy, at least first half of the year. And if you follow Pakistani politics, and its economy, then predicting anything beyond 3 to 5 months is sort of a thing you should not do because you never know what's going to happen. So my guest today is a dear friend. She's also a journalist at Dawn. Hosts the show Newswise on Dawn as well. And somebody who has a very good sense of what's going on in terms of the broader political economy, Arifa Noor. Arifa also wrote a wonderful column this week. She writes a wonderful column every week, but this one in particular was really good because hers came and then Zaid Hussein's column came, and I want to have Zaid Saab on as well because he's called the selection a selection in the first paragraph. So I was like, that's very bold of Zaid Saab to like go out on a, some would say on a limb. Because others are saying we will see on election day. So we'll talk all about that. So Arifa, welcome to Pakistonomy and thank you for taking out the time
Thank you.
today.
No, thank you. Thank you for not just asking me, but also such a wonderful intro. I feel like sort of messaging you and saying, I'll send the check will be in the mail kind of a thing for that great PR.
ठीक है, तो स्टेट बैंक को मैं पहले कह देता हूँ कि क्लियर कर
हाँ.
दीजिएगा पेमेंट. शुरू करते हैं आरिफा. Let's start with sort of on a lighter note. 2024-3 was like a crazy year across all domains. We were talking previous as prep for this podcast. What's your self-care routine going to be like in 2024 to stay sane?
I would just say not just 2023, but even 2022. And if I look, before that, I think since COVID, it's been kind of a roller coaster ride. Perhaps for the world, it slowed down a bit once the vaccination turned up. But for Pakistan, the twists and the turns and the roller coaster ride goes on
वैक्सीन के साइड
without a
इफेक्ट्स जो हैं
break.
वो ज्यादा हो गए हैं.
Huh. So, it's been crazy. And I don't think 2024 is going to be all that different for us. So, I think the best self care would be to just switch off from politics. But unfortunately, now, if I want to pay the bills for my self care, I will have to keep an eye on politics. And that, unfortunately, is going to be life for us in Pakistan.
Well, you may want to follow Modi ji's advice and do yoga, which does you don't
Uh,
require to pay anybody for that. You can do it in the garden all on your own. So, India
yes.
is giving you good advice on that one.
India is giving us good advice, but as I said, the entire sort of any journalist in Pakistan right now, तो हमारी तो जो सारी नौकरी है ना, it makes sure that there is no self care involved. In fact, it makes sure that we are all suffering from PTSD.
Well, yeah,
So
but
that is going to be Pakistan.
I think that's a price many of you or all of you pay in Pakistan, and it's been very difficult. And in conversations you and I have with others as well, there is a genuine, like now on a serious note, a genuinely sort of growing concern about what you can and cannot say, and can and cannot write, and what do you write between the lines, what do you leave to the reader to sort of understand on their own given their knowledge of what's going on. So maybe I'll start there. Right, you're a journalist in this environment. Like, how are you operating in terms of conveying information to the people at a time when there's a lot of like repression all around us? At least we see and hear about it. I'm seeing it at a distance, from a distance. But there's also pre-election communications operations, right? Just the daily dose of like a specific point of view on all sides coming out. So how are you operating in that environment as a journalist and getting the information out there?
Uzair, it's not easy. But I have to say here that we should always remember when it comes to Pakistan that there is a historical context to it. So perhaps it's important to say that it's not as if journalism was ever all that easy in Pakistan. I remember one of the first, I don't know who said it. I can't even remember whether somebody said it or I read it. But it's a lesson that I always remember, and I tell everyone that, Pakistan mein journalism is like guerrilla journalism. You attack, you succeed, then you retreat, you lay low till you get the second moment. So, and it's very important because when we were taught, or when I first read this sentence, there was no concept of suicide bombing. So, guerrilla journalism was basically a war of attrition that you carried out over decades, if not
And
years.
if I may interrupt you, this you told me this earlier as well. This comes from the generation of journalists who taught you, and many of us learned from their writings from the Zia years.
Yes.
That's the context here.
Yes, yes. They perhaps the Zia years or immediately after the Zia years, because there was a lot of these people perhaps began towards the end of the Zia years when the opening was coming. Because most of my teachers are people, or the mentors that I had. These are the people who learned in those years when space was opening up. If they were in Lahore, they had worked for the News or the Frontier Post in those days. The ones in Karachi had worked for the Star, Herald, Newsline. So this is that period where journalism was opening up after that very heavy censorship. But even then, you had to know where the red lines were. You knew how to, as you said, say things between the lines. And then you also knew that if you had, hit somebody hard or hit a sensitive spot, then you also lay low for a while before you come back, or you sort of, put your head out again. So it's always been like that. But of course, there has been something particularly difficult, I would say, about the last 4 or 5 years. There's a new flavor to it in a way. I think in the post-Musharraf period, when the television channels were coming out, one after the other, there were so many of them. Two things were happening simultaneously. One was, of course, that with this explosion of television channels, standard dropped from the point of view of journalism. So when something like that happens, then there's always that fear that this will also lead to some kind of a backlash. And I think the second thing has been that over the past 5, 6 years, I mean, it's hard to exactly pinpoint and say, oh, it started here or it didn't start there. But because of the new environment, a new environment in which there was television, there was a lot of opinion, there was it was not so easy to control because of the frequency. Social media was yet to come. The state has also developed new ways of controlling that information. And so it's slowly and steadily, I think the difficulties are increasing. At the same time, social media has changed this. It's changed it in the way that it's very difficult now to control the flow of information. So, there are numerous checks on mainstream media, but there's always social media. So it comes with its own baggage, lots of problems. We keep talking about fake information, disinformation, but at the same time, it allows a voice to be there that so far, the powers that be, as we call them, cannot completely control. And I think it's important to recognize that, especially because there is an international angle to this also, where, there is the prevalent view, and then there is a view which is coming from a minority, but is now making a difference.
Yeah, I think as a very senior person out of the Islamabad Pindi corridor recently told some people that I know that it's not social media, it's Shaitani media, and we need to control it. I fundamentally disagree with that perspective. But even there, I think, and I would love your thoughts on this, right? Because we are exposed to a lot of the daily information coming in from social media, and being able to tell the truth from what is fake or what is being put out there is hard, even when you're consuming it that much. You feel like, okay, you would have some immunity, but it's difficult. But I sort of noticed this in the last year as I started thinking more actively about the role of social media. It's not just what's on Twitter/X or on Facebook or Instagram. I remember as a child, I grew up in the same neighborhood that my parents still live in. The Jummah khutbah by the Imam, who's still the Imam there, used to be informed by Jang, Ummat, or the paper special edition that would come out on Fridays. You may remember that used to be the case. उसमें हदीस और सब होती थी, तो you kind of knew कि अगर आपने घर में वो अखबार पढ़ा है, certain segments, so the resonance was there in the Jummah khutbah. And now we joke, like I was joking with my father about this and some of the other people I know who still attend the mosque when I went recently, that the khutbah is now informed by WhatsApp. Now you can't control WhatsApp. And
Yeah.
so the Imam Sahib is not on Twitter or consuming tweets. He's consuming WhatsApp.
WhatsApp forwards.
WhatsApp forwards, memes in Urdu, clips in Urdu that are edited, not edited. And you can't put that that genie in a bottle again, because let's be honest, the government's own functionings would stop if you did that. Control that shaitani part of the shaitani media if you were to believe in that. So I think at some point you gotta let it be, and you gotta sort of elevate the level of discourse, which brings me to my question to you. And you said standards decline in mainstream media, particularly electronic or television media. Help the listener understand, what do you mean by that decline of standards? Like, what exactly would you sort of put it in that bucket? Is it the quality of discourse? Is it the types of people running primetime shows? Is it the lack of research? Like what specifically sort of has been this declining trajectory?
I think it's a little bit of everything. You've put your finger on it. It's never one factor. So, first, we have to keep in mind the larger context. Before Musharraf opened up, the General Retired Musharraf opened up, the electronic media, you had a handful of newspapers, the print media in this country, and that was where your resource was, your trained human resource. And suddenly from that you move on to an environment in which you have, you begin with 5 television channels, then it becomes 10, 15. So but the trained professionals that are there are just coming from these newspapers. So obviously a lot of the positions were filled by young people, by senior people perhaps, who weren't aware of what journalism was or on the job training, right? So that's factor number one. So everybody is looking for people, everybody is picking up people. Some of them are new, some of them are old, some will adapt very quickly. The people who come from print are not necessarily good at the electronic media. Those who do well with the electronic media necessarily don't have the experience. So, there's that point. Then you're changing the frequency very, very rapidly. I mean, you're talking about one newspaper, or, bringing out a newspaper once a day, as you said. दिन में एक दफे होता था, then perhaps a few media groups would have an evening paper that would come out, that would also be just a few pages.
या
And
दोपहर
you
में वो
have,
छोटा सा अवाम की
हाँ,
एडिशन आती थी 2 बजे के करीब.
exactly. It will be, not every media group had that version. It was just the bigger ones who would be able to do that. So you have that resource. But then you're talking about 24/7 news channel. You have to fill the air. And then television is an expensive industry, which is why when you look around the West, you will find 2 or perhaps 3 news channels in a developed country like the US or the UK for that matter. So you have to think, what happens when a country like Pakistan, with a very small economy, is running 30 to 40 or more news channels? What will happen is that they will have far smaller budgets, and those budgets will not allow for reporting, which is very expensive on TV channels,
And if I
because
may interrupt
send.
you, because I'll bring the economic part of my brain is kicking in, then there will be a race to the bottom for virality or sensationalism, because that's how you capture the eyeball. And that's the shrinking, not even
Yeah,
a growing pie, a shrinking pie of advertising budgets has to be commanded through
exactly.
that.
Exactly. But also within that, the last point would be that when you're not just the shrinking pie and you're appealing to the lowest common denominator, but also because you don't have the money to invest into documentaries or reportage, which would mean sending out people into the field, then they come back, then they edit, they put it together. What do you do? So you basically hire anchors, hosts, talk show hosts, you build a studio, and you fill, if you have a 6-hour slot. I mean, television usually runs on 6-hour slots programming, which you will then repeat for the rest of the day. Think about it, from 6 o'clock, no, 7 o'clock in the evening till midnight, you have talk shows. So you hire the talk show host, and you have a studio, and then the rest of the guests are just coming, the conveyor belt. The guests are coming in and leaving, and you're talking about the same issues again and again. So not only is it very repetitive, and that's where the sensationalism comes in, but also what it basically means is that it's talking heads. You don't have enough facts. You don't have the resources to report and clarify or add to the debate. You're basically just letting people talk. So even the talk show host becomes known for his or her opinions. The guests become known for his or her opinions, and that's all that's happening. People are talking to each other or at each other. So for me, as someone who's old fashioned, and I'm the first to admit it, this obsession with so much opinion is what bothers me. I mean, we're not reporting anymore. We're just, everybody has an opinion and everybody gets to air it, and that's what's happening. So this is also a problem, because once you start airing just opinion, the next problem that comes in is, as you said, that the person who shouts the loudest, the person who's the more theatrical, will not necessarily be saying the right thing or have the right information, but they will get the eyeballs. And then it's also very easy for the misinformation to be out there, because coming back to that idea which you mentioned earlier, which is about the social media and how there is a lot of misinformation, I completely agree. But my concern here always is, or my solution here is, that if the mainstream media had more credibility, it would be able to say, well, this is correct or this is not. But if the mainstream media's credibility is also shot, which is what is happening in Pakistan, then who is going to counter that WhatsApp forward? And who is going to get up and say, well, it's not correct? And who will believe that person? So, for me, the credibility is a very important part of it. And I think the mainstream media could have played a role. But once its own credibility has been so affected, for lack of a better word, then I think the WhatsApp forwards will rule the roost.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into where we are right now and the elections that are coming up. I was watching Khwaja Asif Saab yesterday on Khanzada's show, just to, because he was being asked about the campaigning the PMLN is doing, and that made me think, the two leading candidates for prime minister in Pakistan, let's say there are three: Bilawal Bhutto at number 3, distant past, like, not in the running, at least that's my view on the situation. But the People's Party's PM candidate, Mia Nawaz Sharif, 4-time prime minister candidate, and Imran Khan, aka Qasim Gebba. We're on YouTube, so we can say Imran Khan. One's in jail, the other one basically in house arrest voluntarily, because he had his coronation moment in at Minar Pakistan, and then hasn't, at least as my mind recollects, hasn't done a major jalsa since then. And we're in January 5th now, basically a month away from elections. What's the election feel like in Pakistan this time around? Because 2018 and 13, I vividly remember, was proper campaigning. Whereas right now in Khwaja Asif was accepting on Khanzada's show that, yeah, we need to up the tempo here because we're not engaging with the voter that much. And of course, the PTI is left to hosting virtual jalsas, which then leads to a throttling of the internet magically. So what's the ground situation on elections like right now?
A lot of uncertainty. So in the drawing rooms, and the drawing rooms of Pakistan are also a place where a lot of politics happens. The drawing rooms are constantly asking when the elections will be held, or
So there's still
will
doubt.
they be held? Will they be held? So every time you meet somebody in Islamabad, the first question to each other is, do you think elections will be held? So we're still having that conversation, and the Senate resolution that you passed mentioned earlier is not really
I did not pass it, Arifa. America
Sorry,
se nahi aayi sazish.
my bad. You mentioned it. I have the passing on my head because shortly before this we were all giving beepers for the television channels on what does this
ये
mean.
भी अमेरिकी साजिश है.
नहीं, ये कहीं और से साजिश है. सबको मालूम है ये साजिश कहाँ से हो रही है, मगर ये इसको कोई अमेरिका से नहीं जोड़ेगा. So, I think that question is still there. There is just far too much uncertainty. And the fact that the political parties are not out there in the field is adding to the uncertainty. So, when you mentioned 2013 and 2018, just recently, just yesterday or day before, I was having this conversation with the colleagues, and we were saying exactly this, that there were a lot of problems in the run up to the 2018 election. Also, there was, particularly even then, there was one party that was being targeted, there was another political party that was being propped up, but it was still a good contest at the end of the day. The two political parties in Punjab, the Pakistan Tehreek Insaf and the PMLN, fought a good battle. I mean, you could say that in every constituency they went at each other, and both of them knew that if we put up a good fight, we could change the result. And that was the mood back then. In 2013, perhaps, obviously, PTI was not such a big force then, but it was still, I think there was a lot of excitement. There was definitely a lot of campaigning that was happening. There was a lot of excitement because, obviously, the just the fact that a transition was taking place, that a parliament had completed its term, and now an election was taking place, and another party would come into power, also added to the excitement, even though I think it was quite clear who was going to win. If there was any surprise of 2013, I think it would just be that PTI did extremely well in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Otherwise, the result was not a surprise. But this time around, as you said, PTI is just dealing with a lot of challenges, for lack of a better word. PMLN is surprisingly not moving from the parliamentary board meeting phase. And they have lots of reasons and lots of excuses for it. But
Give
they're
me the
not
top
being
three.
able to.
What are the reasons? Why are they doing that?
So, the main reason always turns out to be that, oh, we want to make sure that we give out the right tickets to the right people so that the election campaign goes really well and we manage to win a lot of seats. Another one which has been put forward off the record is that, Nawaz Sharif Saab has come back after such a long time, and these lengthy meetings give him a chance to interact with all the people from the constituencies, because you see, once you start looking at the possible candidates from one district, they will all turn up for that meeting. So that meeting becomes very long because they all get a chance to say something, and he is there, and it's making up for all these lost years. It's, I suppose, you can't discount it entirely, because, but what they don't say, but what the rest of the country can see, is the fact that the PMLN is perhaps, in terms of its connection with the people, at a moment which is a very difficult one for the party.
Well, that's what I was going to say, if I may interrupt you.
Huh.
Like, if the district candidates, let's say, are sort of visiting Mia Saab's home to pay their respects and convince him that they're the right horse for this race, that gets into this disconnect, right? Because typically in election campaign, it's the leader that goes to the district to engage with the people on the ground, or also the electables or the candidates on the ground, give their vision of what they want to do and convince them and energize them. Whereas if it's in the reverse, then obviously it's seen as a selectoral process, as less of an electoral process, where you're not really going down to the ground to even understand or bother understanding what it is that people care about at that point, at this point in time, right? I mean, that's a fundamental flaw in the strategy from what I see.
I wouldn't, you see, so in Pakistan, obviously, political parties always do this kind of brainstorming. I think, from the little that I know as an outsider, sitting in their party headquarters a lot of the time, the applications come in, you do that. But this is a process which is usually carried out behind the scenes. It is not the process that becomes the face of the party during the election campaign. And for me, this is the problem, that when the election is coming nearer, then the main thing for a political party is to be seen campaigning. Your candidates are holding corner meetings. The party leadership is making more than one appearance a day. I mean, if it's someone like, if you talk about Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and it has one star, so to say, then Imran Khan would be making 2 to 3 appearances in a day, because he has to make sure that he goes to all the critical districts or areas.
Which he
While
was
if
doing
it's,
before he was put in jail. Like, he was a
yes,
man on a mission. Every day he was
exactly.
somewhere.
Every day he was somewhere, and in the run to the 2018 election, I think he was doing more than one a day. While the PMLN, of course, because the Sharif family is there, they can afford to split up and perhaps not take on such a cruel schedule for an individual, but the family can divide up and go to different districts all in the same day. But this time around, none of that is happening. And as I said, the PMLN has their version of why this is not happening, but I don't think it's very convincing. And this is why a lot of people feel that Nawaz Sharif in particular and the rest of the party also do realize that there is a serious problem on the ground. The voters are not happy with them. The crisis is growing, but now whether they're worried about that and hence not stepping out, or there is the other argument, which is that they're so confident that they will be brought into power that they don't want to bother. So I think it's a little bit of both. You also know that if you go out there, it will not be a very pleasant sight. There perhaps the people will be able to capture footage of the unenthusiastic voters who turn up, or the participants of the jalsa may say something, the crowds aren't big enough, and then there is the confidence that if not us, who, so why bother? So
Let's
it's a
switch.
little bit of both,
Yeah, so
I would
I'll
say.
get to the implications of that and Zahid Hussain Saab's thesis, which I would love for you to answer whether you agree with his view or not. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's switch to the other leading party, right, that is in the running, PTI. Leader in jail, second tier leadership being hounded, so limited sort of amount or capability to interact with people on the ground. But despite that, at least from a distance, from my point of view, I hear and see that the popularity remains intact, particularly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and segments of Punjab and places like Karachi. Um, but at the same time, the criticism to the party has been that they've abandoned sort of their workers, in the sense of the ones that have stuck around, and given leadership positions to lawyers who, up until a couple of years ago, weren't really anywhere to be seen in the party and weren't the face of the party, which then is a question over the strategy of engaging with the people. How are you seeing the PTI's strategy at this point in time in the face of immense repression, immense pressure, restricted ability to campaign and rally their people? Like, how are they faring, given the dynamics at play here?
It's really tough to say, because I think, in Pakistan's history, whenever a political party is being pressured, we always come up with, they did this wrong and they did this wrong. And it was the same in 2018. Oh, PMLN wasn't really clear about what their slogan is going to be, and then there was divisions within the.
डॉन लीक्स को जरा बेहतर हैंडल कर लेते तो ये मामला नहीं
Ha,
होता.
so, but I think that at the end of the day, all of this is irrelevant, because whatever do you do, I mean, whether it's 2018 or in Panama, oh, they should have had better lawyers. They shouldn't have. Why did they bring the Qatari Khat? So it's the same with the PTI, whatever. Why would they? Why have they brought the lawyers forward? Why aren't they doing a more effective job of arguing in the courts? They've taken the appeal to the wrong court. But all of this is irrelevant, because the point is that that pressure is just not going to ease. It's not about strategy. So that caveat aside, I think that the problem, the reason they've chosen the workers is because to a large extent, even the reason they've chosen the lawyers is because to a large extent, even the workers are underground and facing considerable problems, and there have been raids, people have been arrested. people are either in jail, some have come out. I mean, the numbers that we're talking about, I think, get to a point where it's really hard for a journalist sitting in Islamabad to get a sense of how difficult it is for a political party to operate right now. But even the workers have been picked up. Even the workers have been arrested. There were a couple of cases in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, again, the province where the party is so popular that the police had problems picking up the workers. But in Punjab, obviously, it's far more difficult for the party to operate. So I think they eventually felt that they had no choice, because at least the lawyers, because of the lobbying of the lawyers, legal community itself will have a better chance um, to stay free, to be able to put their, submit their papers and make it through. So I think that is the logic right now. Whatever they're doing is basically in terms of sheer survival. And I say that because, as I said, parties in the past have all had to deal with this. So it's no different here in that sense. Whether they could have done something better or worse, I think perhaps in hindsight, I personally may have a better chance of being able to judge this or not, because it's just chaos at the moment with the political party. I mean, we don't even know who the candidates will be. They don't know who the candidates will be because nobody can access Imran Khan. I mean, how do you even talk to a man who's in jail, who's not allowed to even appear in court?
He's in
How are you
solitary
going
per
to
his own claims, in the latest Economist
solitary
piece.
है या नहीं है? But the point is कि access बिल्कुल नहीं है ना. एक तो political party की जो second tier है वो है. All of the second tier is underground. Either they've left the party, or they're underground, or they're in jail. And in all three cases, the politicians have no access to the party leader. The only one who can talk to him directly are the lawyers. So imagine in this situation, how do you even decide the party tickets? You have no idea. I mean, there's no way of talking to the workers. There's no way of finding out what's happening in a particular constituency. Who do you think is a better candidate or not? I don't know how they're going to carry this out. So at least the lawyers have that ability to communicate with Imran Khan, or to, get out there, talk to the media. I'll just give you one example. So when they submitted their papers earlier in Lahore, only the papers of two candidates who we know are associated with PTI were accepted, Shafkat Mahmood and Salman Akram Raja, for the same constituency. This situation is changing because obviously they have now, they're going to the election tribunals and a lot of their papers are being accepted. But I'm just saying that
I think
imagine
today
you
Shah
have,
Mahmood Qureshi's was accepted as well.
well, as I said, now the situation is changing and we'll have a better idea. But in that initial phase, only two candidates, and by the way, both of them had submitted papers for the same constituency. Of them will end up with a party ticket, if there is a party ticket to accept. Frankly speaking, we're not even sure about that at the moment. So I think that they're just basically, making it up as they go along, because they just have no idea.
And I wouldn't blame them, right? I mean, I was reading the piece Khan Saab wrote for The Economist this week, and I'll try to put the link in the description. If I were to assess the strategy of a leader, or let's say compare it in 2018, like, he's still got a better strategy. The man is able to get his message out in the international press from solitary confinement, as he himself writes in the piece. And I'm like, there's, as you said, when the headwind is so strong, there's nothing, the strategy isn't going to be optimal in any way, shape, or form. And even despite that, he's able to dominate the headline in an international publication by putting his view out there and really calling into question the legitimacy of the upcoming election, which is, I would say this is kudos to them, right? The fact that they figured that part out is a good point of their strategy to get the message out. But let me pivot to the election and what the likely scenario.
Sorry, may I just add
Yes.
a point here? Because you're talking about strategy, I would say yes. I mean, whatever they can manage, but a lot of the credit also goes to the other side, because the kind of repression that is taking place, and I know, in Pakistan we have this whole debate of whether it's precedented or unprecedented and whatever, but you also end up providing the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf with such a lot of fuel. If your candidates are, just the fact that the party leader is, all his case trials are taking place inside the jail, tasveer na nikal aaye bahir, and then the papers are being rejected and people are underground, and every second discussion on television is, why haven't they apologized for May 9th? Are they repenting or not? So then it gives you all that publicity that you perhaps were not even looking for. You get to play the victim card, and you also get a lot of publicity and attention, which frankly speaking, is not about strategy or anything else. It's just about the fact that here is a man who scares everybody in Pakistan. That's what it boils down to: one man against the system. They have made him that man more than he himself could have projected himself to be that man. And they have made him this victim. So what else do you need?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on from Pakistan's history is that Pakistanis, generally speaking, love an underdog story. I mean, people generally all over the world do, but Pakistan in particular, or this region, South Asia in particular, has that tendency. So yeah, you created that. You're fueling the underdog story. So let's switch to the election and the scenarios at play in terms of the contest that's coming up. Your colleague, somebody I really respect and pay attention to his views, Uzair, has basically said it's a farce, essentially, if I were to sum up that column, and I'll link that for people who want to read it. One, do you agree with that view that it's already determined that PMLN Nawaz Mia Saab is coming back? And if that's the case, as you described, right, aptly, and I agree, that there's a disconnect between the people and the party, you have a lot of work to do post-election to stabilize or maintain stability in Pakistan. There's an IMF program that needs to be carried forward and extended, or a new one negotiated. There are challenges with relations to foreign policy, Afghanistan in particular right now, given the violence that's brewing. And broadly speaking, this view in the peripheries of the country, particularly Balochistan and brewing in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well, that the center needs to do something different because people are getting agitated, and rightfully so. And Mr. Kakar, the caretaker prime minister, is, I think, only making the situation worse by his statements. But if the electoral contest has been decided, does the party coming into power recognize that it has a very short leash upon which it has to sort of do the things that are needed to be done?
I hope it does. I hope it does. And I would say that perhaps one of the reasons we see so little of Nawaz Sharif is because he realizes that this is really not a good situation to be in. And in that sense, I think it's very different from 2018. So, another way of looking at this whole debate, and to talk about, as Zahid Hussain Saab said, that it's become a complete farce. But you do realize that when you have a farce like this, whatever is happening to the PTI is in front of us, but it has basically also means that the PMLN has been robbed of any legitimacy possible. Once they come into power, who will? I mean, maybe they think themselves that they have a legitimate right to be there, or they won the popular vote. But for the rest of the country and perhaps the world, not that it matters, it will be more of a selection process. So that lack of legitimacy brings its own set of problems. So, there are two things here. One is that whether you have a legitimate government that comes into power after a free and fair election, or whether you have a government that perhaps did not win a free and fair election and come into power, the three problems that you identified don't change. The economic situation that comes with an IMF program, and the challenges of making some very, very difficult decisions. A security situation that seems to be getting worse in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And then the third, which is that you deal with two unfriendly neighbors. One a situation that seems to be in a state of status quo. I mean, in the sense that it's just become an unhappy, hostile situation with India, and there seems to be no breakthrough at the moment or any chance of a breakthrough. And a relationship with Afghanistan, which is just growing worse. So that free and fair election and a legitimate government which enjoys the support of the people is not going to perhaps impact all three things. These challenges will be as big for both. But of course, I mean, if you have a legitimate government that enjoys the support of the people, it might have the confidence to take some decisions. And if it doesn't, then, and this is what we have seen 2018 onwards, that when a government is tainted, when it is seen to have come into power because it was helped by the powers to be, then it becomes paralyzed. The PTI government was not able to take a lot of decisions, and the PDM government that followed was even worse. So now my fear is that, is this also going to be, a deterioration that we will see?
Yeah. I was going to say, like, and that's the whole sort of, any new government, when people in Pakistan, the term is new mandate, and has a new mandate to allow and make tough choices, quote unquote. Any government, as legitimate as it can be, has a limited sort of runway to do that. Even in the US, people say the first year is basically it. The second year is midterms, and then the president is at risk of becoming a lame duck president. Which usually more often than not happens in Pakistani context. It's a shorter runway, and we play out 2024. 25 becomes the third year of General Saab. And I can already hear the comments coming in. We spent about 40 minutes of our conversation without mentioning General Saab and what he wants and desires. So I would love your thoughts on sort of your read on what Pindi is looking for, because General Saab, obviously before the holidays, was here in DC, and it was reported from, in terms of the conversations that he had with members of the diaspora or people he engaged with from the community here, was that he feels that Pakistan will be part of the G20 by 2030. We should not lose hope. SIFC is the end-all, be-all solution in terms of stabilizing the economy. But that was his message here in DC. What is your read on sort of the top three priorities? Oh, and the last thing that I was reported was that, a very negative view of Afghans writ large, that they're criminals, essentially, is sort of like the terminology that was used, which links back to the repatriation of refugees issue that is being done in Pakistan. So what is Pindi's interest here? Because, of course, March, IMF, May, June, budget. Those two are big events that a lot of that stake for Rawalpindi as well. So how does General Saab want to navigate this situation with a government that perhaps won't have the legitimacy to do the things that need to be done?
Look, I think the economy is now a big issue for the establishment, as we call it. And you can see that from the kind of decision making that has taken place in the past few months. I would say the SIFC is in place. It's how shall I say, its sphere is expanding. It was first supposed to look at foreign investment, then apparently now investment that's coming in from within the country will also pass through it, that one window operation kind of a thing.
Making determinations on power tariffs all of a sudden.
Exactly. And then you have obviously so they're entering the agriculture field. There is talk about all that will happen in there. So clearly economy is, how shall we put it, a priority. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say, I don't know them well enough to say what is the 1, 2, 3, but clearly it is a priority. But again, the fear here is that when you are in the kind of situation that Pakistan is in, which is that the governance system seems to have come to a halt, then it's very difficult to see how any decision making is taking place. And and let me just explain what I mean, because I'm trying to make sure that I say this as accurately as possible. That when we had the PTI government come in 2018, there was this initial perception, even within the PTI, that this was a fresh start for the country. They would have the technocrats, they would be able to take decisions, but they didn't. Perhaps, initially there was some effort to stick to the IMF program, but with the kind of political instability that a government is facing, or it did face, it really wasn't able to do much. COVID didn't really help matters. The process began with the vote of no confidence, and everybody began talking about how the PDM government was more experienced, the PMLN was more experienced. Basically, the problem with Imran Khan and PTI was that they were incompetent, they were inexperienced, they just didn't know how to run a government. But PMLN will come in and fix things. We saw how that happened also and how that played out. So clearly, lack of experience doesn't seem to make much of a difference.
दाल में कुछ और मसले हैं.
हाँ, दाल में कुछ और मसला है. उसके बाद फिर then when we were sort of the parliament's term was ending, then started the third version of this rosy future, which was that these are such difficult political decisions, and you can't really expect political governments to take them, and they're always looking at the people, blah blah blah. So now the caretaker government will come in. It might stay on for longer than 3 months, and they will not be bothered about elections or people or whatever, and they will take the tough decisions. They didn't take the tough decisions either. Because for me, and let me just explain what I mean here, that for me, raising the electricity tariffs or raising the gas tariffs is not a tough decision. The IMF is telling you to do it and you just do it. That's not a tough decision. The tough decisions would be, are you privatizing something? Are you getting rid of all the how shall we put it, all of these subsidies that you give to the rich and the powerful? Are you restructuring the economy? That hasn't happened either. Now, there's an excuse for each one of these governments, कि वक्त काफी नहीं था, हम privatize कर रहे हैं, PI is on schedule or whatever. But so far, none of those tough decisions have been taken. So, to me, as I said, dal mein kuch kala hai, I'm really not sure. But I think the problem in Pakistan has always been, even with our military dictatorships in the past, that the problem of political legitimacy becomes so big that nobody is able to take the decisions that need to be taken. And I think the Musharraf era is a very good example of this. Here was somebody who came in, who, in terms of perception and in terms of the mood in the country, was also welcomed, was quite popular in some ways. Perhaps he wouldn't have won an election, but in terms of pushback from society or civil society, political parties, just wasn't there. He had the world also, being friends, and yet he was not able to make
he was unable to put a retail tax on retailers.
Exactly. He was not able to, do a lot of things in the political sphere that we don't need to get in, but that is a perfect example. He said, I will tax the retail sector. The traders came out, and that was the end of that, because political legitimacy became important to him. So it's not a personal choice. There is something about the political and economic and social framework of Pakistan that eventually everyone, and that includes political parties and that includes military dictators, that legitimacy becomes such an issue that nobody is really able to make the tough decisions. So my fear generally is that everybody may talk about the economy, and that includes the establishment, but the political will still seems to be missing. I can be wrong. I hope I am proven wrong in the coming days, but I just don't see it.
And if I may sort of add a nuance, you said political will, and a lot of people will think of it as politicians having the will, but you mean right? And I want to make sure.
I mean the political will in terms of all the stakeholders, and that includes the bureaucracy, that includes the military establishment, that perhaps also includes the business community. They're again asking for the subsidized tariffs. I don't know about I'm not the best person to talk about the energy subsidies that go to export sectors, but the little I do understand is that it's business as usual.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole challenge, right? I think my whole issue over the last 2 years, or going back years now, actually, not even 2, has been that I cannot point to as the North Star of Pakistan, or what the North Star of Pakistan is in the minds of Pakistan's elites who make very big decisions in drawing rooms. And the most dominant of them all, of course, is in Rawalpindi, the drawing room of all. Um, and when you don't have that vision, you're not going to be able to communicate that effectively, right? Like Khan Saab, for all his ills, had a vision, Riyasat-e-Madina. Now we could play with that and we could say, okay, kya idea kya hai? Jaisa bhi tha, flawed tha, but ek argument tha. Uspe bhi there were issues. Before that, it was the PMLN's vision of large infrastructure projects to change the trajectory of Pakistan. CPEC was the anchor of that. At this point in time, I am very sort of lost in terms of understanding that here is a country with 60% of its population under 35. What is the vision you're trying to communicate to them to rally them to sort of do things a bit differently, or to rally the population to think? Do you have a sense of what that is? There a vision? Do they have a recognition they need a vision? Like what is it?
No, you see, the thing is that the PMLN, what you call the PMLN vision for me is the political machinery of the PMLN, which is that you do development. That development allows you to pass down state patronage, and you build up a political machine which allows you to win elections. Imran Khan, not what I would call a vision, but I would say that the good thing about this was that I think Imran Khan was perhaps at the moment one of the few leaders who would use his populism and his imagery of Riyasat-e-Madina, whatever, to, at least prepare the people for a difficult period. He never took any decisions, but, I felt that he actually spoke about this issue that, we have to improve. Everybody does that. But there will be a tough spot in the middle. We will have to go through difficult times, and then we will be able to make our future better. So that was something I think that he had to offer, and is why he fired up the people's imagination. For the rest, unfortunately, I think the problem is, and that includes the establishment, that nobody wants to, again, that problem of political legitimacy and short term victories that they're looking for constantly, and that includes Imran Khan also, means that nobody is willing to take the long term decisions. And hence, every strategy as such is still looking for that injection of funds from abroad. So, wo foreign investment aa jayegi, CPEC will come along. If CPEC is not coming, the Gulf states will put the money in. We will do something in agriculture. To me, all of this indicates the same thing, which is that somehow, very quickly, we will be able to figure out how to get these funds from abroad, which will allow us to get back to a nice, comfortable lifestyle without realizing, or again, they don't have the will, that in order, you have to restructure the economy if you want it. But restructuring the economy will mean that you need to take the existing funds and spend them differently, but nobody wants to do that. That is why I said, that problem of political legitimacy continues to haunt them all, and I don't think that's going to change in February.
Well, you answered my last question, which was, what will be the key driver? And I think we can sum it up with the problem of political legitimacy, or the lack thereof, as being the thing, the ghost, what.
Can I quickly add something?
Yeah.
It's a political legitimacy because, because of the kind of history that we have had, what our leadership doesn't understand. And again, when I say leadership, it means not just the political, but the military, the civil, everything, that you will need to build some kind of a consensus if you want to go forward. As long as the one at top constantly is in power and thinking, I need to eliminate the other, then you face the political legitimacy problem, and all your energies are directed at that elimination, not at the fixing of the problem. So now you either get the elimination done and then move on, or you just get everybody along and move on. There is no third way. But they keep thinking that, this elimination is very quickly going to take place in 3 to 6 months, and then we will figure out what we want to do with the country. It doesn't work that way. It
Yeah,
hasn't so far.
and that ghost has been haunting the country since its very foundation. I mean, I went down the rabbit hole yesterday of reading the 1949 debate on the objectives resolution and some of the speeches given by the then opposition, which was mainly the minority Hindu community that was objecting to it. And there was a passage there that, the one of the members of the opposition was complaining that this was not on the agenda. When we flew from East Bengal to come to Pakistan, to come to Karachi for this debate, we didn't even know this was going to be tabled. The quorum is improper at this point in time, and what you're trying to push in the Constituent Assembly, this was the argument, was that forget about the Islamic clauses and all of that. Just put it to the people. You're the Constituent Assembly. You don't have the right to put something like this in the sort of preamble of the Constitution. Take it to the people, take some more time to think about it, get input from folks on this. And none of that was done. And it was just pushed through. All of the proposed amendments were rejected, and Liaquat Ali Khan had his own way. And the irony among ironies was that this was the Islamic preamble to the Constitution that Sir Zafrullah Khan vehemently supported as well. And, now we kind of know what happened to Sir Zafrullah Khan's own community later on down the path when the Islamic monster was let loose. But forget about the Islamic clauses. I was thinking about this, after going down that rabbit hole, that 1949 to 2023, we still have the same issue. Parliamentarians in parliament say कि ये बिल आया है, एजेंडा पे नहीं था, हमें मालूम नहीं था कब आया, कैसे आया, टेबल हो गया और pass ho gaya. So I think, again, as you rightfully, and I agree, and we can end on that note, that is the core problem. Every experiment but the inclusive constitutional experiment has been tried, and all of them have failed. And perhaps it's time we try the more inclusive constitutional process in this country.
We can only hope. My fear is that things will get a lot worse. I don't know if they're going to get better, but I can guarantee you that they're going to get a lot worse.
Well, on that note, let's go out of this episode into self-care mode and do some yoga or something. So, Arifa, thank you so much for taking out the time. Always wonderful speaking with you, and keep up the great work. Lovely reading your columns, watching your show. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to me. Thanks, Uzair. I really enjoyed this.